Welcome to One Bad Podcast. Here's your hosts, KD and Shaner.
Katie, so now we're coming up on the Made in the Name and Made in the Name of Rock and Roll era, and this was it's a crazy time because we've touched on it in the last couple episodes how like we had more success than we've ever had, playing bigger shows than we ever played, getting more success on the radio and all of that, but there was still this, for me, there was like this thing was creeping in of kind of like running in quicksand, where it was like we're working harder and somehow you almost feel like you're not really getting farther. Like we talked a lot about just how money wasn't really stacking up, and just kind of even feeling like the tours were starting to get like, you're playing the same places to the same amounts of people. It was almost like this, I kind of had that feeling of sort of plateauing, but I think that's the best way I could put it, is like kind of running in quicksand, where you're like, we're working harder, but not seeing any headway, right? Like that was how I kind of felt going into Made in the Name. I don't know how you were feeling.
Yeah, totally. I feel in some ways like that Black Buffalo era was like we were the tightest we'd been musically, but also like just as a band of bros, and then in those pressures of real life, which we sort of alluded to last episode, started to just creep in on us, right? And it sort of created some strain, I think, amongst us, as it would anyone, I think, right? It's like it'd be different if you all of a sudden we had a song that just went viral, and we're making, we're headlining Budweiser stage or whatever in Toronto, right? Like we didn't quite get that. We're always looking for that thing that really just catapulted us, but we never had one of those crazy moments. All of our growth was sort of gradual, and we earned every show, every fan, and then like in some ways it was nice. It was kind of like a steady growth, but it was never just like boom, right? Although I think in hindsight, it would have been nice to have one of those crazy shots up, but that it wasn't the OBS story, right? Like we're an old-fashioned rock band in a lot of ways, right? Like we weren't like exactly like.
Well, and I think that.
You go ahead.
No, I was going to say you're 100% right, and I think that I also felt like, looking back, like there's no one to lay blame on, but I kind of felt like, again, we were doing what was asked of us, and we would sit around racking our brains as to like ways to sort of break out of this box we were in, and one of the things that you talked about in the last episode was like, how do we get down to the US? Like, how do we start really pushing that, right? Like, people probably don't understand or know, and nor should they, that pushing a single in the United States, talking straight up numbers, it's like, you're paying $60,000 per single in some cases, right? So it wasn't like, oh, just go, and toss that.
Yeah, I remember that's a great point. And around that time, we did some research. Like, so we've done a bunch of hits in Canada. What does it cost in America? And what they say, and the research that I had done and have confirmed since, is like, if you have a song that takes off and you want to take it all the way to number one, which you got to keep sort of feeding the machine as on the way up, it's $1 million. Like that's in pop, $1 million just in radio costs, right? For rock, let's say it's $500,000, which we didn't have $5,000, let alone $500,000, right? So, and then we also found that our label was, and this is not speaking out of turn here, but they didn't really care to push us in America, like, because to them it's a pain in the ass. They got to spend a bunch of money to break a band that they have no guarantee will work in the U.S., right? And I think the similar thing happens to so many Canadian bands. The Tragically Hip is a great example. Like, how did they never break in the U.S.? All those songs. I mean, New Orleans is Sinking. How is that not a hit in America, right?
Right.
But it's because the label and the powers that be just, it's a major risk. They can break you in Canada and get funding in Canada, but the U.S. it's a complete gamble, and they're better. I'm sure in their minds it's better to make $100,000 a show in Canada versus $5,000, $10,000 a show in America, right? So just keep playing the $100,000 shows, and but for us,
well, and it does.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it brings up this thing that I know that I felt so much was like it was kind of this like a constant catch 22 because it was always like, well, if you guys play more shows in the US and like build up a groundswell, but also in order to play those shows, you should, start working radio. But to work radio, you should start playing some shows. Like we were getting all the
Oh, it's just,
messaging of like, well, it was like a
yeah.
cyclical kind of like you could never get started because it's like, well, if we're not playing anything, how are we going to get any kind of, because to get radio in Canada, as we've talked about this whole podcast, it was like play, 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 hit up the radio stations and be like, we're back in town. Like maybe this time you give it, but they were it was always that cyclical thing. It would drive us crazy because it felt like excuses, like you'd said, to just never do it, never start, like never take a shot, right?
This is bringing up this emotions that I haven't felt in a long time, but the number,
I
the
know, I
number,
was thinking the same thing.
like the number of times that you and I had that chicken and egg conversation, like I swear,
Oh,
if I had $5 every time we had that conversation, we'd both be fucking rich. But it's like I remember you and I just being like, well, "What do we do?" It's like we do tour or radio first campaign or whatever, and it would drive us crazy because it wasn't just like a theoretical approach. It's not like you're playing Risk and it's a board game. It's like this is our lives, right? Our
yeah,
careers, which are our lives, right? And I remember you and I just beating our heads against the wall, thinking, "How are we going to do this?" And and being met with apathy, I would say, on the label side and
yeah,
management side for sure. Um, and so I remember, so to this point, and to our lovely listeners, it's like we did that. We took the initiative and got some U.S. tours. Remember, we hounded our agent, Ralph
yeah,
James, get us some U.S. shows, and even him. I mean, from the agency side, they get 10% of whatever they book us for a guarantee, right? So he's
yeah,
booking us for maybe 10 grand if we're playing a festival in Canada, and so he gets a grand. To book us in the U.S., we're getting maybe $500, maybe,
yeah,
right? So he's getting $50 to book it. So what's the incentive for him? But also, I think he knew it's going to be a shitty tour if he did it. But we
yeah.
kept on him, and he finally got us a U.S. tour. I remember those first U.S. tours. Remember we played that one festival where they had the big cow or something, and they burned the wooden cow. But
Yeah.
it was like we did these tours, played these shows. I remember setting up like, hey, we're playing in Chicago, right? One of the great cities in the world and one of the great music cities in the world. And like no one came. They were just like, no one cared.
Literally, dude, that show, literally no one was there. There was zero people in the bar. And like, what a snap back to like our early days, because you're literally starting the show to nobody. And, two songs in, a couple people come in and, oh, they really liked it, So when are you guys coming back?
Yeah. It was the
Oh,
worst.
man.
It was the worst kind of deja vu, the kind where it's like, yeah, that feeling, it brought up, I could feel it kind of even within right now, like it's coming up, it's like that feeling of like, oh my God, we're doing this again, man. Like we're doing those tours, which we did back in, I guess, 2006, 2007, where no one
Yeah.
came, no one cared. It's just disheartening, right? Like it's sort of,
Yeah.
I remember us having this conversation. It takes a bit of your soul every time you do it, right? Because
Yeah.
all that time and effort and preparation, and we put on a good show, but to two people, it was just like soul sucking. So yeah, it was like, that was that sort of, that space we're in, which is weird. After you've had all those successes, we're sort of in this sort of, what did Matt Hicks call it? Where you're not in heaven and not in hell. You're in,
What's like like rock
Pur-
purgatory.
purgatory, yeah,
Yeah, it's
rock
purgatory.
purgatory,
Yeah.
yeah. We're in purgatory, right? It's like you guys have done well. You did what we asked of you, but you're not successful really because you haven't delivered that sort of unknown thing. And yeah, this is that's crazy to bring up these. It brings up these crazy
I know it
feelings,
does.
right?
It actually like you actually have like it's like a muscle memory, like a physical memory of just like it is a sickening feeling in your stomach when you're about to play a show and you realize like no one's coming, like no one cares. It's a tough feeling. It's hard enough when you're starting out, but when you've been at it now for whatever we're at this point, 12, 13 years, you're like, man, hard to go through that again.
Well, yeah, we felt like we did been there already, right? So,
Yep.
yeah, and I think it's like it's one of those things where it felt like we can't do it all again. Like, and that's where it felt the pressure of like either we, And I should say this too. I mean, thank God at the time we didn't have any issues with drugs or alcohol. I mean, we
Oh
all
man.
we crushed a fair amount of drinks probably back then, but we could all manage it, right? Like you can imagine why so
Yep.
many bands get derailed in that sort of purgatory, that perpetual state of unknown. It's like, well, I don't know what's gonna happen,
Yep.
so let's numb the uncertainty with drugs, right? And that's why so
Yep.
many bands fail, but we didn't have that, thankfully, and we still had each other as a group, which I think is really key.
Absolutely, dude. And it's good to lay this foundation going into, again, I get a little fuzzy on some of these timelines about like when exactly we're writing and not, but we're back in Saskatoon at this point and feeling this, like, I mean, I guess desperation's the word, right? Because you're kind of like, the team is hands off. Everybody's a little like, well, they didn't know why we were successful to begin with. Like the label was just always like, oh, hey, congratulations, top 5. Wow, awesome. Like, we don't know what to do with that because we didn't think you were going to do it. So it was always this kind of like the team was pretty hands off. We were racking our brain as to what to do. And so going into the next record, which didn't have a name yet, obviously, we were like, write the best songs we can, obviously, but like, what's the missing piece, And we'd had amazing producers, like, we talked about Neil, who did our first two records, Danny Craig from Default, who did the Red album, and is like, that album still sounds incredible. Eric Ratz did Black Buffalo, and it was like one of my favorite recording experiences. And I thought, again, those songs sounded amazing, but it was kind of like, do we go with like a quote unquote hit maker, right? Like, and kind of, we really got personal on like, why are we not breaking through? And I know that for myself, there was a lot of kind of, I'm an artist, I want things my way. I had control issues, especially then. Luckily, like through great friends and an amazing wife and a great support group, like, I've been able to work through a lot of that stuff. And this era kind of started a lot of that for me, of just saying, like, is it time to let go? Kind of just like, do we completely let go? Like, just give ourselves over to a hit maker and like knowing that you and I are never going to like quote unquote sell out and just say like, hey, do whatever you want with us. But it was kind of, I remember we had very serious talks of like, if the missing piece is that maybe we're like, gripping the stick too hard and trying to be a little too in control of everything, maybe it's time to like get a hit maker, get somebody with like a crazy track record, and sort of, we're going to write the songs, obviously, but it's like, maybe we just say, okay, we're kind of like, we're clay, we're putty, like, help, like we're here to just be completely wide open, and,
Yeah.
and that came from a good place. I think we were coming from a place of saying, obviously we write great songs, obviously we put on a great show and all of that, but like, what is missing? Maybe we're kind of getting in the way. Like, maybe we're too stuck up over the control we wanted over our own band, right? And I think it was a fair thing to ask, because you're kind of, like you said, man, we had like, how many of those long drives did you and I have talks of like, what is it? Like, what could it be? And so you start to go into this other place of saying like, is it a personal thing? Is there something about us or the way we're kind of running the band is not breaking us through? I don't know, right? So I know that was the headspace we went into the next record, which is find a hit maker and sort of just let go a lot more,
Yeah. And you're so right. Like there was that question of like, I remember having these discussions, like what is it? Why can't we get to that level where it just blows up, right? Like, and yeah, I remember. I mean, I don't know if I ever said this to you or told this to anyone else, but I was like, for a second there, I was like, maybe we should just submit Shane to Canadian Idol, and just have him go like. But I always thought it'd be done in a cool way, where like you went on there and just blew everyone away, which you would have, right?
Well, thanks, buddy.
And And I'm glad we didn't, because you know, anytime you get those sort of get famous quick schemes, they usually backfire. You know,
Yeah.
and thankfully he didn't, because you know, Jacob Hogard already did that, and he's a complete piece of shit. So
Yeah.
so
Confirmed.
we didn't want to be following in that footsteps, right? Like be the band that
Yeah.
made it because the singer did that, you know. But yeah, I think like, anyways, to your point, like, or I guess what I'm saying is I hear what you're saying totally. Is like we'd had successes, and maybe from the outsider, like a typical fan, like, well, just keep doing what you're doing, right? But for us, the feedback we kept getting, and feedback as in from our team, but also just the financial feedback was like, what you're doing is not working, right? Like you've had successes, but they're not good enough, right? So that's where that sort of like maybe that self-doubt creeped in. It's like, well, we kind of succeeded, but we're not like Metallica, Pearl Jam, whatever. So how can we get to that level, you know? And it's also a weird time in the music biz, because the two bands I just mentioned, Metallica, Pearl Jam, Foo Fighters, Green Day, those are all 90s bands, right? That blew up, which the industry had changed so much. So it's like, not one of the things that we maybe didn't give ourselves credit for is that like we were a modern rock band that wrote songs together and played our own instruments and put on our own outfits. Like we did it. We were something that didn't really exist much anymore, right? So thank God we didn't just say, have someone else just change us, right? Like we let a producer have some kind of input, but we never sold out, right? I think that's and we also were something that there's not many rock and roll bands that exist like OBS is, right? Like they're kind of going the way of the dinosaur, unfortunately, and we didn't really want to accept that, you know?
Well, no, man, and I don't think I don't even think we want to this day, because I think that's what it's what we've always thought was special about, especially rock and roll, was it's like there's legitimacy there, right? There's that the idea that you could just be 4 people or 5 people, whatever, writing songs, and just like we said from like the day we met, like taking on the world, like that kind of. I love that stuff. All of our favorite bands had that. It wasn't like, let's get some good-looking people and get somebody to write their songs, and hopefully they got enough talent to make it happen, and just sort of like plug it into whatever today's thing is. Like we weren't about that. But yeah, man, we're up on time here, and we're gonna get into this more. It's funny, like you said, this is bringing up some it brings up some feelings, because it was a tough time just to know what to do next. So we're going to get into what we did next on the next episode.
Let's do it.
Thanks for listening to One Bad Podcast.